7 decades ago, the first television adaptation of Superman arrived. Now, it's time to rocket back to the 1952 to 1958 series Adventures of Superman, starring George Reeves. In this rewatch podcast, my guests and I break down each episode, from its black and white crime drama beginnings to the kid-friendly color seasons, as we celebrate one of the most underrated Man of Steel depictions of all time. Welcome to another exciting episode in the Adventures of Superman. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. Joining me to discuss Season 1, Episode 16, Mystery in Wax, is the Geek of Steel himself, Luke Bugg. Welcome to the show.
Hello, sir, and thank you for having me on. I'm really looking forward to this. This is something that we've been in the planning for quite some time, and we've finally, the stars have aligned, and we can come on and talk about this show, because I've got a lot to talk about regarding this particular episode, and to talk about you as well, if we can, because I've got questions for you that we will get to later on. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be a fun show.
I never turned down an opportunity to talk about myself, so that's perfectly fine.
This is why we do what we do.
For sure. We were just talking off mic, but I'll say it again now on the record here, that one of the best things about doing this has been connecting with fellow Superman fans like yourself and people like yourself from all around the world. And so to be able to talk about this 70-year-old series with a fellow superfan is always a delight. So I'm excited to get into this. Now, in a second, I want to ask you about your overall experience with Adventures of Superman. But speaking about this episode in particular, this was Season 1, Episode 16, aired January 2nd, 1953. Quick side note, I know that, especially with these Season 1 episodes and the fact that it aired in syndication, there does seem to be some disagreement online about some of the airing dates and episode order. And so I've seen Mystery in Wax, which I have as 16, and Treasure of the Incas, which I had as 14. I've seen them flipped in a couple of places. I've been following the IMDb listing, and so that's why we're here when we are. But in any event, written by Ben Peter Freeman, directed by Lee Sholem, and our synopsis: a series of prominent Metropolis citizens seemingly commit suicide after their deaths are predicted by Madame Selena, and none other than Perry White is next to have a death figure unveiled at the Wax Museum. Now, you and I were emailing, and I gave you kind of a list of episodes that were open, and I was curious which one interested you most. And you jumped at this one. You said Mystery in Wax is a fun one. So what was it about this episode that made you want to do this one?
I, as we all do, jumped on Google. I wanted to there were so many there to choose from, and I wanted to make sure that I picked something interesting to talk about. And this is one that, after sort of reading the brief synopses of the other episodes, I thought, wow, this is, for a show going back all those decades, this is dark territory for essentially a kid's family TV show. How are they going to tackle this? And anything to do with, a little bit spooky, things like waxworks and things such as this, I was like, okay, this sounds like a good one for me. And it did not disappoint at all.
This really was a fun one. I really had a good time going through this, and I know we'll have fun talking about it. Now, as far as your history, your experience with the George Reeves Adventures of Superman series, when and where and how did you first encounter it, and what role, if any, right, has it played in your Superman fandom?
This is the thing that I wanted to talk about most on here. One of the many things is that, of course, I know of this series, of these characters, of this chapter in the Superman tapestry, as it were. But this is all completely new territory for me, which is why this was the perfect gateway for me to begin my adventure in watching this TV series, to be able to speak with you about why it is such an important part of Superman's life. I could go onto any forum or any social media page and say, why should I watch this program? Why should I add it to my many list of TV shows that I have to watch? Because there are an abundance these days of shows that one has to keep up with. But to hear it from such a passionate fan about why I should watch this show, it's why it was a big part of me wanting to come on here today to talk to you. So this was my first really main episode of this show to watch, because I wanted to go in completely new. And they've been quite hard to find over the years on DVD and VHS in the UK, especially going back to, like, the early internet days, as it were. But luckily for me, they are all online now, and I have purchased quite a few episodes today through Amazon Prime, and I've been looking on the DVD sets on eBay because I feel that I need to binge all these now. Not only from watching this episode, but listening to some of your episodes as well, and hearing what passion you have for this show, but your guests as well. So I'd like to say thank you very much for taking up even more of my very, very free time to watch more episodes of this show and your podcast.
That's great to hear. It's really interesting because we've had a mix of guests on the show, and we'll continue to have a mix. I've had people in their 50s and 60s who grew up watching it, not in first run, but in syndication in subsequent
Mm,
decades. Eventually, we'll have some folks on who grew up watching it when it was initially airing.
wow.
I've had people, like myself, in the 30s and 40s who came to it far more recently. One thing that's been kind of a little bit of a theme on the show is a lot of people discovered it, or at least had more of an opportunity to watch it when those DVDs initially came out around the time of Superman Returns. And we've lamented on this podcast a lot that I wish it were more readily available. I mean, thankfully, yes, you can buy them digitally on Amazon Prime, on Vudu, various places there. But as far as streaming through a subscription service or readily available cheap DVDs or Blu-rays, not to be had. I mean, we are in the 85th anniversary year. I was kind of hoping of Superman generally. I was kind of hoping, like, if there were a
Mm.
time, this would be it.
This is it. No, I mean, I'm all for physical media. We never know when films or TV shows are going to get taken off Netflix or Amazon, and it's nice to have something physical, to have a collection behind you, like with my shelves behind me. It's something nice to look at and hold and feel like a piece of that history. And over the years, sometimes you can, yes, order DVDs and Blu-rays from different countries, but they won't necessarily work on your devices in UK or Europe. So it's always difficult. So I have found some suppliers now of these DVDs, and I am looking forward to acknowledging this part of Superman's history. It's something that I've always addressed over the years. It's to respect the past of Superman, but also embrace the future as well, because all these separate chapters over the years, whether it be Smallville, whether it be the adventures of Lois and Clark, whether it be anything, I'm always happy to get more content about Superman, because as long as we're getting more content, his legacy lives on. So this is why, over the years, I've dealt with people that can be quite gatekeeping, as it were, and sort of, you can't watch this because you haven't watched this and you don't know who that person is. It's the same with the Superman comics. I'm always constantly learning new things. I would never claim to be an expert when it comes to Superman because there is so much out there to learn. But I'm always willing to learn more things because it brings me closer to this character that I adore. So now I get to speak to you about this show. It's going to make another part of that Superman mythos a part of me. So I'm grateful for that.
No, of course. No, I love hearing all of that. I think we're like-minded in that sense, right? Of trying to remain open and flexible and
Mm,
willing and eager to learn. I've done 100 episodes now of my other
yeah.
Superman podcast, Digging for Kryptonite, and I still would not call myself an expert. It's like I'm still learning. There are still gaps that I haven't closed yet in terms of reading or watching or listening, and it's
Mm,
it's a fantastic process to go through it. And I think what's particularly interesting to hear from you that this was your introduction to the Reeves series. People listening to this or watching on YouTube might be familiar with you and your work. So your website, the podcast of, or the geekofsteel.com, you have a podcast called The Podcast of Steel, which I know by the
yes.
time this episode is out will be back. So hopefully people will
Yes,
check that
it
out as
will.
well. You have a strong social media presence. So, you're out there, you are in the Superman fandom. This is a character I know clearly you have a lot of passion for, yet there's still this pocket, right, that had remained unexplored. And so that's one of the cool things about doing this show in particular, to whatever extent, whether it's the guests on the show or our audience members, if it prompts people to kind of check it out for the first time, or maybe just kind of go back to it, right? Because there is so much, to your point, like there's so
Mm.
much to go through that sometimes it might get a little lost in the shuffle. So to whatever extent we can sort of help bring this back up in people's minds and hearts, I'm all for it.
And that's it. I mean, obviously, I'm aware of that part of the Superman history. I've seen lots of props at the Superman Museum, and you know, it's a huge part. You know, it's a massive part of Superman. If we didn't have many of these shows, we wouldn't have the next thing or the previous thing. There's a whole sort of red string theory that you could put on a massive chalkboard about Superman and where he comes from. So we need to respect every single aspect, the good, the bad, and the sometimes the ugly, like some of the waxworks in this episode, which I hope I won't be dreaming about this evening, because I was sure I was trying to get as close to my TV screen as possible that one of these there was a head on a pedestal. I was sure that was real, and it's about to blink or move because it was so spooky. But we'll get into those props later on. But it was a great episode for me to begin with, that's for sure. And it's given me a hunger for more. I want to binge this, and I'm going to enjoy that journey as well.
Yeah, so I'm so curious. Obviously, we're here to talk about this specific episode, but what were your impressions of the show generally, and in particular this depiction of Clark Kent and Superman?
I'm I'm a fan. I'm a big fan of it. You can see where it sort of advanced from those early days of the radio plays into live action, making a movie into a TV show, going from sort of animated shorts to something a bit for a wider audience, for the mums and the dads and the people that want to get back in and sort of enjoy entertainment. And I was loving what I was seeing. Short storytelling done well, very precise. Introductions to characters, introductions to a plot. You try and sort of solve the case yourself. There's a lot of detective work in here, as well as a lot of journalistic integrity between Lois and Clark. And Perry White was wonderful in this, especially. Perry White is a character that I often hear in my head when I'm being told off at work for doing something that I shouldn't be doing, or if I've not got work in on time. There's a voice in the back of my head, a lot like Perry White, and this version, it was beautiful. I loved it, and again, my first episode is definitely wanting me to watch a lot more of this.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, speaking of Perry, because he comes up a fair bit, and
Oh,
I've been, I guess, a little hard on this version of Perry White because when you think about the character, there's sort of this range of gruffness, right? We've seen many different depictions, and I think in terms of how gruff they are, it
mm.
varies by project, by era. And this Perry, for the most part, there have been some pockets of exceptions here and there where you get to see a little bit more of a nurturing or paternal side, which I tend to like in my Perry White. But for the most part, this is an overly gruff Perry. It fits the show and the times and all of that, but it's one that I don't have as much attachment to. What's your favorite flavor of Perry White?
I like him when he gets caught off guard in those moments when he's looking out for Superman or Clark and Lois. He still wants to get the story right and out on time. He's a man that loves efficiency, but he's more invested in people that can deliver a story for him, and he wants to hear their version of the story. He can get a news story from anywhere, some Joe on the street or somebody just talking to him. He wants to hear somebody else's truth, opinion, and interpretation of the events. But when he gets intertwined in the story, sometimes, like with this particular episode, he loses that, not professionalism, but you see more of an open side to him. You see he's more honest, and yes, you do see him gruff and angry and upset. And slams his fist down on a table, and his ashtray goes all over him. And it's those moments when you don't see the boss of a newspaper. You see this man that has a passion for the truth and for storytelling and for wanting to get the best not only out of his paper, but the people that work for his paper as well.
I'm glad you mentioned that ashtray scene. I had made a note of that as well. We'll get to it in the episode, but it's at the point after he's been predicted to die, and Clark is trying to convince him to have a bodyguard, and of course Perry refuses. And in frustration, at the end of that scene, as you said, he slams his fist down on the table and hits the ashtray, and everything comes flying up. And from his reaction, I said to myself, was that planned? I mean, it was right there. So it
Yeah.
seemed like it was by design, but his reaction, I don't know, maybe he didn't expect as much to come flying up at him and I was looking through IMDb trivia and some of the books that I have and things like that. I didn't come across anything in that preliminary research that because there have been instances where we've kind of been looking at behind the scenes trivia and it's like so and so really got hit in this scene and they were on like we've had stuff like that. I didn't find anything here, but so I would say if nothing else, great performance because
Oh yeah,
he really sold the fact that he didn't mean to do
really
that and he
did.
was surprised.
But no, and it's moments like that when you see a different side to a character in those more sort of quiet moments. And yeah, and in those few frames when he does hit the ashtray, as you said, his face does change. It almost looks at the camera. Was it on purpose or was it not? But it's he's a strong character. And again, it's a long time since Superman's been around, but we have to remember that Lois Lane and characters like Perry White and Jimmy Olsen have been around that same time as well. So they're as equally as important as Superman. So it's whenever we get to focus on another character for a little bit longer, whether it be somebody like Jimmy or Perry White, it's always a treat to see a different side of them in different lights. So when you see them in a gruff mood or a happy mood or a playful tone, it's always nice because you get to see these characters in a different way.
For sure. Now, you mentioned how surprisingly dark this episode was. And yes, it is representative of this first season. One of the
Mm.
things we've talked about and the adventures of Superman fans out there are well aware of the shifting tone of the series as it makes its way through its 6 seasons. And this first season, which was filmed from start to finish, and they sort of batched the episodes, so they would shoot 4 or 5 episodes in a block and kind of do like all the Perry White scenes in a row, in his office and so on. But so those were kind of done in a vacuum, and they were darker, and they really did play like these crime dramas, and had this very noirish aspect. And I love them. You do sort of wonder how children of the day receive them, and they were. My understanding is when Kellogg's came aboard as a sponsor, and then they actually started airing these, that there were cuts that were made to kind of soften it a little bit. But even within that, you still see people in various episodes getting shot or stabbed, or in this episode, we have discussion of multiple suicides. Turns out that they're alive, but still, there's still all of this talk. So season 1 has a very specific vibe. It is isolated to that first season. Season 2, I think you sort of get a little bit of in my opinion, a kind of a perfect blend of the darkness of season 1, but with more of the softness that you'll get even more of in the later seasons. It's kind of a nice in between. That's my memory of it. And then seasons 3, 4, 5, and 6, those are the color years. And that's where we
Yeah.
get into a lot lighter, kind of sillier territory. Not necessarily my preferred era of the show, but we'll see when we revisit it.
That's it. That's what I'm looking forward to now after diving into this. I'm looking forward to putting some time aside to starting from the beginning and enjoying seasons and then going back and listening to your episodes to hear your thoughts on it. Because if there's anybody out there that, again, not knows every single aspect of the show, but it's those opinions, it's because where the show has gone over the years. You've seen it grow and you've seen it change, and you know why certain things have had to change over the years as well.
Absolutely. So I think this is as good a time as any to dive in more specifically to
Please
Mystery in the
do.
Wax.
Yes.
So I have to say, I looked up the guest cast here, and a couple of things to note. We had recurring bit player Stephen Carr, brother of Tommy Carr, who directed half of the season 1 episodes. He pops up in about half of these. He
Oh
pops up
wow.
all the time in various roles. Sometimes little bit parts, other times very prominent supporting roles. But he's here as Dr. John Hurley, the first person in this episode who we see receive an invitation to this exhibition at the Wax Museum. We also had Lester Sharp as Andrew, the husband of Selena, who's creating these sculptures. But for me personally, this was such a weird coincidence. So Mira McKinney plays Madame Selena. And I
Mm.
looked her up on IMDb and I saw the little blurb, and I clicked to read more. Her father is the person responsible for McKinney's Consolidated Laws of New York. Now, I'm a lawyer by by training. I don't practice, but I am plenty familiar with McKinney's, and that was her father's. I was like, what a funny coincidence. And it's one of those weird things where all through law school, like you're always dealing with McKinney's, and he had the idea to kind of take all of these statutes and cases and consolidate them in these digestible books that attorneys or students could kind of carry around and reference. And so, that's something that I've heard and used a ton. And then that was her father. How do you like
See,
that?
I love things like that. I'm always looking into things such as synchronicity of being in the right place at the right time, and things like that. See, you've got a link now, in a way, to this world of Superman, to this show, and this particular awful, awful character that was a fantastic villain, but just not nice to herself or her husband or her captors in this. It was great.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, just kind of, I guess one other big picture question. So, did you watch Lois and Clark: The New Adventures of Superman?
Yes, sir, I have.
So, did this kind of give you any kind of shades of that show? I mean, obviously this show doesn't deal with the romance, right? But kind of in terms of the cast that it's focusing on and that kind of case or story of the week.
I mean, it's that nice emphasis when you have a beginning, a middle, and an end. You know where you are. I love watching shows where I don't have to worry about different towns and different characters coming in for a special episode. It's a start, a middle, and an end. I get closure. I get to enjoy an episode, and I get escapism, and that's where I can see the emphasis in this as well with these characters. It's like, oh, okay, I know who these characters are, of course, but their chemistry between each other and everyone else was great, and yeah, I can see that similarity between the two shows, and especially with this one when they were all on the case, they were going off to different places. They all work together so well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I always think about that. And of course, Lois and Clark was the new Adventures of
The
Superman, right?
new,
And so,
yes.
kind of at least in that sense, you see that link. And I've been doing a fair bit of rewatching of that show as well. And so it's just kind of interesting to see, separated by decades, but, you kind of see
Yeah,
echoes of each other.
the magic is still there, as it were.
For sure. All right. So, Mystery and Wax, we open with an invitation being delivered to Dr. John Hurley. We don't see him. We only see his hands as he's receiving the invitation, and he opens it up, and it's Madame Selena's wax museum and a special exhibition. And there's a note at the bottom that it's going to be revealed who's next to die.
Mm.
Very ominous, and he crumples the
Yeah.
paper. So,
Very dramatic intro to a show with a very dramatic close up of his hand as well as he was holding that paper and ripping it up. Well, hello, I'm in for a fun ride here. This is going to be interesting. And yeah, it was a very dark invitation to a special event. I think looking back, maybe I should have picked a more lighter episode to enjoy. But I'm glad this is, it's shown me the light in a way that not all shows get to be light and funny all the time. There needs to be some darkness mixed in there as well. And this was a very dark character.
I honestly, I think you picked a good one. I mean, having seen all of these first season episodes and now having rewatched almost all of them because we're deep into the season now. This I would say this is one of the stronger ones. I mean, at the very end, we'll give our rating on a scale of 1 to 5 fedoras. So
Okay.
kind of
Oh, wow.
let that percolate as
Okay,
we're
I've got to
talking.
go now. Yeah.
But I will say I think this was one of the stronger ones. So I was happy when you picked this. I mean, obviously I was covering it either way. We're going through
Mm.
all of them, but no, you definitely picked a good one. I love the first season a lot overall, but there have been episodes I have not enjoyed as much or I've had more problems with this. With one or two exceptions, there were a couple of things that I bumped up against, but for the most part, I thought this was a really tight, moody, atmospheric episode, and I think it really kind of all tied together very nicely. So no, you picked a good one.
Good. I'm glad.
So from there we go to the Wax Museum, and we have the audience sitting there in the gallery waiting for Selena and for this wax figure to be unveiled, and she comes in and makes her way across the room and stands in front of everyone. What were your initial impressions of Selena?
um, she was clutching some pearls. I thought we're going to have another Martha Wayne situation here. What's going to happen? And but after that, as soon as she started talking and almost looking through you as she was talking, I was like, okay, well, this is clearly the villain of this episode because it was just something about her very over dramatic, very well spoken voice when you're thinking, okay, there's something going on behind those very evil eyes. And yeah, I was like, okay, I want to know more about this character. I know these are short episodes, but I needed an origin story about this particular character and how she became to be this way. And I was like, okay, I can see why she's got these people all here together. Let's dig into this story because I want to find out where this is going to go.
Yes, absolutely. Definitely makes a strong initial impression. And yeah, she's very, it's very dramatic. And as she's speaking, is kind of this, you know, monotone, like
Mm.
almost possessed air that she has about her. And I guess that's the idea, right? She's, you know, as we come to learn, pretending, but as far as everyone knows, she's channeling, right, this other power, right? She's received, and we'll learn more about this in an upcoming scene, but, you know, she's been told who is going to die next, and she's created the figure, and that's what she's going to unveil. And it's her unhappy duty, I think she calls it, right? She takes no delight in this, but
No.
she's just a vessel, right? And she is creating these figures that will portend who is next to perish. And she unveils the figure, and of course, it is Dr. John Hurley, who has quite quite a strong reaction.
Yeah, I mean, I thought this is some top-notch acting here. This is, this is a guy that's clearly done his training. It was a very strong reaction, but again, I love seeing the effects of seeing. Well, it's not truly a waxwork, as it were. It's just him standing in the same spot. So it was a very like. It was very similar to what he did look like. So I would be quite scared if I saw myself in a waxwork museum as well. But yeah, strong reaction to say the least.
I know he's got the fist up to his mouth, but no, that is funny. I was thinking that too, right? Yeah, and with him, and then later with Perry, right? Of course, yes, the show did not create wax figures of the
No.
actors, right? So it's just them standing there. And so, yeah, you're right. I think that does contribute to the effect of how freaked out you would be. If you were like, literally, it's so lifelike. Have you been to a wax museum? Is that something you have any
I
interest
have,
in?
sir. Yeah, I mean, I've been to a few of varying qualities, put it that way. We've got a few here in London, Madame Tussauds, which is a fantastic one. I went on a family holiday many, many years ago to a holiday town called Blackpool, which is up north. And at the time, I think I was around 7 or 8, and it was like a horror waxwork. So you went through this museum with various scary depictions of scary looking characters. And at the time, I didn't know that there were sort of paid actors walking around at the same time. And I felt the back of my jumper being pulled at the time. And I turned around and there was a small person with a scary mask on. And this person was eye height with me at the time. And I was not a fan. I screamed the place down. I was in hysterics. So much so that my mum and dad and sister carried on the tour, and I went off to the staff room to be calmed down with a can of Coke. I remember that much. And I've got very fond memories of sitting down in this staff room with all these paid actors and all scary masks and makeup, just sitting down, having cups of coffee, drinking tea. And I was just left alone. So there you go. That's the 1990s for you.
Yeah, that's pretty. I could see how that could be traumatic, but at least then you got the behind the scenes and you got to
Oh yeah,
see.
yeah. I was fine after that. Once he took like this, it was I think it was like some sort of scary bald mask. He took it off, and it was just like a regular guy, of course. He was like, "Okay, let's go and have a sit down. Let's get you not freaked out." I was like, "Okay." But yeah, so I have had some experience with waxworks.
Gotcha,
I shouldn't
gotcha.
have. I shouldn't have picked this episode. I'm going to get some like relapse traumatic dreams tonight. I tell you what, goodness me.
I know I'm a little a little worried now. Hopefully it'll be all right. If you
I'm
dream of it,
sure.
you'll hopefully Superman will yeah, enter the dream, and
Good point. Good
everything will be
point.
all right. So hopefully we could just forge that connection, and that will
Yes.
overpower any fear of the wax figures. Yeah, I mean, I did it I think just once in the city in New York, and it was, yeah, I mean, it was cool. It wasn't something that I ever, I mean, we have a small child, and I was like, when he gets older, you know, yeah, I would probably do it one more time, but it's not something that
Yeah.
I've ever kind of sought out. But I mean, it's amazing. Like it's amazing to
Oh yeah.
see.
No.
Um, but in any event, so we have this unveiling and Hurley's reaction, and next we see Hurley allegedly stumbling, despondent, stumbling through the streets of Metropolis, and he makes his way to the pier, and he's like, taking off his clothes, and he jumps into the water to his death.
Mm. Even took his
Yeah.
shoes off. He's there taking his clothes off and just jumps in. I was like, surely at this point I'm thinking, okay, well someone's going to come and stop him. Someone's going to prevent him from jumping into into the sea. Nope. You just see him just literally jump out of the frame and just go deep, deep down. I was like, wow, okay. Now this is how you tell a story, because now I really want to know more.
That's the thing. To your point, I think they really did a good job in this episode of building the intrigue because
Mm,
we're only given, obviously now you and I have the entire picture of this episode, but at this point you don't really have much, right? The invitation talks about, we're going to find out the next person to die, and then you have Selena's speech before it's unveiled, but you still don't really know what's going on. How does she potentially have the power to predict who's going to die? What is going on here? And so it's very dramatic, and I think it pulls you in pretty quickly to try to get a sense of. I mean, I think probably the thing that I was thinking of the first time I watched this was that he was just driven to suicide. That he was just so the fear of what could happen right over the upcoming months, because there's like the 6 month window that's given that he'll die within
yeah,
6 months, right?
it's
That
very
fear would just be so overbearing. I mean, of course, it's quite severe if that causes you to instantly take the steps that he appears to here. But still,
yeah,
I think that's kind of the initial,
yeah.
the initial thought.
It was moments after he got the news. He didn't sort of get any of his affairs in order. He wanted, I suppose, to be in control. If he could be in control of his life in that moment, and that's what we believe, as you said. That's what we believe is happening. Which was, oh, I do love a twist, and it was a good twist.
Yeah, and then we see the next day the newspaper headline, right? Which now I think there's a little bit of a discrepancy here because the headline mentions that he's the fourth prominent citizen
Mm,
to die by suicide recently, but when we get to the next scene in Perry's office and later in the episode, it seems that there have been three so far.
mm.
Unless I missed something, but it seems like there was a little bit of a discrepancy there. What was your take on that?
Probably a deleted scene somewhere. We need to get the extra footage. I'm sure there's some cinema reel somewhere that I've got the answers to all these questions on there somewhere.
I suppose. But the headline is helpful, right? Because now this gives us
Mm,
more context, right? You get more of a sense of, okay, we've had now a series of people who have been predicted to die and then took their own life. So what's going on? So then we go to Perry's office and we have Lois, Perry, and Clark talking about all of this. In this scene, and then later on in the scene where Perry refuses the bodyguard, I really felt for Clark in those scenes and in this episode because he is making the connection, I think very reasonably, that you have three people predicted to die who all then commit suicide. There seems to be some connection. Lois and Perry are very skeptical of this.
and again throughout it, I think there's even a part towards the end when he's talking about they've all the same sort of height and build, and like they're not believing him. They're not. I was like, come on, I'm a journalist as well. Let's listen to my input. We've all got ideas that we can use together. Why are you not listening to mine, which are kind of the most reasonable that are making the most sense?
That's the thing, because it's not like, and I feel like Clark, he's pretty clear. He's not saying that there is some supernatural component at play here,
Mm,
but there are these threads that, again, as you said, it's like as journalists, right? You need to follow them. Now, look, I know we need to have some tension in these scenes in these episodes, right? Like I get, kind of from that perspective, but just in the moment of the story, I just felt for Clark. It's like this poor guy, they're so quick to dismiss. Perry allows him to go off and talk to Selena. He's like, well, talk is cheap, go. And then Lois, I mean, look, I love when Lois and Clark are together and they're investigating, so I was happy. But she's like, oh, I'll go with you. He's like, well, I thought you thought there was nothing to this, and she's like, yeah, but
yeah,
you do, so I'm going to tag along.
yeah. Thanks. I'm going to do all the work again, and you're going to come and steal my story at the last moment. Thanks, Lo.
Yeah, for sure. So again, Clark was really doing his job here. I felt and looking for the connection points.
Again, doing the work, looking and finding the story, something that Perry White wants him to do, and now he's not. He's not really pushing him forward in the right direction.
In fairness, now I will say, because Lois did bring up the point that I guess the police had looked into Selena at some point
Mhm.
and cleared her. So at least there was that. There was something to kind of back up this idea of like, hey, this isn't the avenue to pursue. But at the same time, they
Mm.
didn't really have anything else. So at least
No,
Clark was on the ball.
as always.
As always. So then we get to the museum, and Lois and Clark speak to the gentleman who works there, who I initially just kind of thought he was some underling. We find out later he's her husband.
Oh yes, the poor, poor soul that is Selena's husband. Again, you think, oh, he must be like janitor, or he's there to sort of, usher the people to their seats. Nope, he's there. He's the partner in crime, as it were.
Yeah, so Andrew Dawn, and there's a kind of like a throwaway line from Clark in a later scene where he's just like, "Oh, Selena's husband," and I just kind of felt like, "Oh, that was key information that they just kind of like dropped in there." But yeah, I definitely assumed he was some kind of underling. But they asked to speak to Selena, and he goes off to fetch her. And while Lois and Clark are alone, they head into this hall of death. Quite a scene in here. So you have curtains, right, concealing the wax figures of the three men who have died by their own hand.
Hmm.
And you pull a rope and the curtain parts, and you see the death figure, the wax figure, and a phonograph recording plays of the victim describing their predicted and then eventual death. Lois describes the scene as gruesome, which it was accurate. What was
Oh
your
yeah,
what
no,
was
yeah.
your reaction?
It was one of the darkest moments that was sort of just like brushed off. It was like, okay, this person died because I said they were going to die. So here's this person and what they look like, and here's somebody else impersonating their voice. And here's the next person. Just pull the rope, and the curtains will display them for your entertainment. It's like, wow, this who owns this company? Who's making money out of this? How much do the tickets cost? And why would anybody want to go? Because you might be the next person on display.
Yeah, again, I think gruesome is a very accurate word to describe this. But again, I mean, it really contributes to the atmosphere of the episode. Now, one thing that I was struck by here, and not to spoil the episode, but I want to mention this here: the victims, right? As they're talking about their deaths, they do put dates on them,
Mm.
and the first one, if I remember correctly, I believe the date of death was 1949.
I was trying to do the maths, yeah. And the other one was, I think, like the early 40s. I was like, okay, so this person, there was quite a gap there.
Yeah, so a gap between the deaths, and so now of course, they filmed the first season in 1951 and then it aired in 52. But still, so let's say we're in
Yeah,
1951 as we're watching this. Um, that's a significant period of time. Now, like I said, just to jump ahead, what we find out is that these people did not actually kill themselves. They are being
no,
imprisoned in the basement below the museum. And
they
I don't
are.
mean to nitpick, but I can't help but sort of ponder how feasible Selena and Andrew's plan really is. How long have they kept, and are they planning to keep these victims?
And if that was the case, that they are living there for more than a 12-hour stay, their cells, it was just a cubicle. There was no bed, it was a stool. How long are they keeping these? I know they're sort of they're prisoners, but show some compassion at least in a very almost cupboard, all confined next to each other. Oh yeah,
I know I had that same thought too. Where yes, they are exceedingly tiny. These cells that we'll see later in the episode, and again, I mean, I know I clearly they're making a ton of money selling tickets
yeah.
to this death gallery, but at the same time, you have to feed these. I mean, clearly they've kept them alive, right? So you got to feed these prisoners. I mean, and just the constant worry that you're going to be uncovered. It's just how it just seems so unsustainable as a business model to have these prisoners for seemingly for. I mean, I guess at some point maybe they would let them go and blow town or something like that, and then try to set up shop somewhere else. But they seem to be in it for the long haul.
I think so. And I mean, if they are, as you said, leaving town and going somewhere else, that's it's a lot of building work to be done. Even though those prison cells are very small, you've still got to find a good place for them.
Yeah, yeah. I don't like that was like I said. If there was one thing I bumped up against in the episode, it was that. It was just when you got those dates right, and you had the sense that at least that first victim had been there for over a year. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, that's insane. And yes, Again, the size of the cell, it's like, your muscles would atrophy. I mean, it's like they all look pretty healthy when they were rescued at the
Oh,
end.
yeah, they do. Yeah, they were very happy to be rescued, of course, but they were still just like, oh, bit of a bad back. You know, I've been stuck in this box for like 6 months. Let's go out and stretch the legs a little bit.
Yeah, and were they getting outdoor time like an actual prison? I mean, were they? I mean, I doubt it, but again, it begs these questions.
Yeah, I mean, so even something like the hygiene of that situation's got to be, a lot to leave to the imagination. But I couldn't see any ventilations, plumbing, waterworks. I didn't see any wax either. I'm not sure how she was making these waxes, but that's again deleted scenes and nitpicking. That was a bizarre concept.
Yeah, not to second guess the villains here, but uh, I couldn't help but wonder if, again, we wouldn't have an episode if they did this. But I'm just saying,
Mm,
with sort of pretending we're in this actual situation, I feel like they just would have been better off finding people to go along with the ruse. Do you know what I mean? Like, if instead of making it or I mean, again, the idea is that as far as the public at large thinks these people have killed themselves, but if the marks were people who were in on it and
mm.
faked their deaths and then just disappeared, left town, whatever, then you don't have to worry about being caught. You don't have to worry about housing or feeding these people.
No, not at all. Or creating the crime scenes, or throw them into the ocean. You've just got one person to look after, one set of clothes. You haven't got to get matching clothes for everybody else. It's again much easier to find some guy off the street to do this job for you. Outsource. That's the way of the future.
Exactly. Well, in any event, I think we've made some good points about how they could have improved the efficiency of their evil plan. But in any
Right.
event, here's where we are. And so Lois and Clark have this sit down with Selena, and
Mm,
she's offended at the designation, the term fortune teller. Right? That's not what she is, and she goes
no.
on to sort of explain a little bit more about what's happening. Right? Her version of it, at least, is that she receives a vision of who's going to die, and she hears a voice that tells her to create this figure of them. And Lois has a great line there
Is that the one where she's oh
about the phonograph.
yes, I had it written down, but you crackle because I can't even read my own writing now. But there you go.
But when Selena talks about the voice, Lois says, not a direct quote, but something to the effect of like, "Are you sure it wasn't a phonograph recording, like in your gallery? Something
That's
like
it.
that." And
That's what I
Clark,
liked about it. It was that sassiness that she had in that. I was like, okay, because this is again a new interpretation of Lois for me. I wanted to see how this was done, and again, it was inquisitive but with attitude. Again, sort of, oh, she clearly you're hearing voices, but is that voice the phonograph that you've already put out the back and made up yourself? It's again journalistic integrity with sass. I like those two combined. It's good.
yeah, this version of Lois has really become an all time favorite of mine. She's terrific, and as we talk about in virtually every episode, we only have Phyllis Coates for the first season of this show, and then Noel Neal takes over, and
Mm.
it's a different take on the character, a lot of value in it, but I think everyone I've talked to so far, we all tend to prefer the Phyllis Coates season one incarnation of the character, and I think this is a great, again, just a small moment in this scene, but you do see that the inquisitive mind and the toughness kind of digging a little bit. And I love Clark clears his throat, right? So loudly, so comically to sort of
Quite
get
a
at
few
Lois.
times as well. He's like, "That's enough, Lois." It's like, go on.
Yeah, it's terrific. And so Selena, really is clearly no fan of Lois. Like when they get up to leave, she promises Clark, if I have another vision, I'll let you know. And shakes Clark's hand, but just leaves Lois hanging.
Yeah, did not acknowledge that goodbye at all. She's like, "Oh, I'd love it if you could come back, Clark. Let's just forget that there's somebody else in this room talking to me. I just want to ignore this person for the rest of my time."
Yes. Although, we've seen versions of that in Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, right? When they're investigating someone and they take a liking to Clark and, kind
Yeah.
of are more dismissive of Lois. We've definitely seen versions of that. But then after Lois and Clark leave, it was interesting because you get to see Selena drop the facade, right? Because she's
Mhm.
had this air about her, right? This theatricality. And then they leave, and Andrew kind of comes up next to her, and she just drops it and laughs. And that's our first hint of like, oh, okay, like now we have a sense of what's going on, that this is all a ruse.
Yeah, and when you hear a laugh such as maniacal as that laugh, if you don't already assume that they're the villain, then you need to get a hearing test because her laugh was just chilling. And it was quite a few times it happened, and sort of one of them I think laughed was like it was quite an extended laugh. I was like, okay, this is she's clearly got an agenda now.
Yes, yeah, very, very much so. I think what's cool about these episodes, and what I'm finding as I'm making my way through is the first time I watched all of these a couple of years ago, I essentially binged them. And
Mm.
so I remember the broad strokes, but I don't remember the ins and outs and twists of every single episode, which is great because as I'm rewatching these now for the podcast, I don't remember again exactly what every beat is of the episode. So I'm, watching. I'm not quite sure. Yes, I mean, of course, we know she's the villain of the piece, but it's like, oh, okay, what is exactly happening here, and what is the plan, and how is it working, and how are they going to figure it all out? And again, I think this episode, as we've said, is one of the stronger ones. I think in terms of kind of keeping you guessing about exactly what's happening here. So,
Mm.
but yeah, so that was a cool moment, and then we were in Clark's office. And as you had mentioned earlier, he's put, and again, another instance of him really doing his job well, noticing a connection, right, among the victims, that they're all of the same height and weight, about 5'8" and like 158 pounds, something like that. Now, this was, I guess, the one other thing that I had a little bit of an issue with, right? This idea that they're targeting people again of the same height and weight, because as we'll come to learn, right, Andrew is impersonating them and staging these suicides. And now this came up. I don't know if this was IMDb trivia or somewhere. I came across this somewhere, that I think the original idea for this episode was for Jimmy to be the next victim, but due to budget
Oh,
constraints, they couldn't have Jack Larson in the episode,
okay.
and so they went with Perry. But when you line these guys up, I don't know that I don't know that they all quite match.
I mean, some are a little bit more slimmer than others. Some are a little bit taller. I mean, I don't think if they're targeting people, they need to be going to a certain tailor's and just watching all the same size people come out of this shop. He'll do. That's the next one. That's one after that. These guys, yeah, they didn't all look exactly like Andrew, really.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I mean, we didn't get the. Well, I guess we did get a decent look at the earlier victims, but I feel like Stephen Carr, who played Hurley, he in particular, right, is like taller and slimmer. He felt like
Tall,
more of
yes.
an outlier, but
Hmm.
in any event, we won't pick it apart too much. But it's just it's just interesting. But again, I appreciated Clark's investigative prowess in making this connection. And Perry comes in and he says that they've all received invitations to the next exhibition. And one of them, I don't know if it's Clark or Perry, but one of them, surmises, well, one of us could be the next victim.
Yes, and I was hoping that it was going to be Lois. I thought, what's going to happen here is we're going to get Lois as a waxwork, but no. Yeah, they all went off to the next event, which still had quite a lot of people going to it. The people of Metropolis back in the day, they were some dark souls. I'm sure there are other forms of entertainment in Metropolis back then, but goodness me.
I know you. That's a great point. You do sort of have to wonder about that. What sort of perverse glee they were taking
Mm.
in these death predictions. Now, I guess in fairness, we're in this age where we're bombarded with content and entertainment demanding our attention. There were some things at the time, but not as much. So, maybe this had more draw. I don't know.
I suppose it would be, but to buy a ticket to that event would be even worse. You think, if I'm going to die after going to this event, I want to be let in for free. I want my ticket to be comped at the very least.
I know that is crazy because it's true. I mean, very well attended these reveals, and we have Lois and Clark and Perry in the audience there. A nice little moment here. They don't go through the business of zooming in on Clark's eyes and giving us the little sound effect and showing that he's using his X-ray vision. But
Yeah.
clearly he is, right, because before the curtain drops, like he's clearly jolted and he starts to get up, and Lois
Mm.
grabs him. She's like, "What are you doing?" And then the curtain falls and we see that it's Perry. So I like that little bit there. I thought that again, like we can fill in the blanks.
Yeah, no, that's what I liked about it. I was I was waiting to see when Superman would appear. First of all, I was waiting to see when we would get a glimpse at some special effects, but I was thinking, oh right, yeah, and I did go back and watch that section again, thinking, oh right, he's using his X-ray vision there, but doesn't we don't have to see it. We know that he knows because we know that he's Superman, and it was a very interesting way of going along with that scene. And then yes, when it did get revealed, it was Paul Perry's statue behind that curtain. The drama then, oh, good drama there.
Yeah, I love Perry's reaction there, where he just balks at all of this, and he's like, "You're a fraud. I'm going to have you driven out of town." That was just like classic John
Yeah,
Hamilton, Perry White. Like that was that
that
was
was
great.
it. He didn't have a fist to slam down the table. It was like, I'm going to put your name in my paper. We're going to run you out of town. You're never going to work here again. And then it's like, come on, we're going. Like to playing the dad card. So come on, kids, we're leaving this. We're leaving this establishment.
Yeah, I know. And as far as sort of wondering when Superman's going to show up and all of that, I think this episode is pretty representative of, especially season one, where some episodes you will get kind of a mid-episode Superman appearance where he'll make a quick save or something like that. But in most
Mm.
of these, it's Clark and Lois or Jim or whatever configuration we're dealing with investigating really for most of the episode, and then the Superman rescue at the end. And so, uh, as we've talked about, I think that's one of the main reasons why I'm glad that they made this Clark so confident and capable. But I also think they had to, right? Because they're pinning so much of the episode on Clark as this reporter. And
Mm.
if he's sort of stumbling around, I don't think we would get anywhere. So I think this
Yeah,
works for this iteration.
it did well. I mean, he was sort of bumbling in some sense. He was very different to what we see at the Superman at the end of the episode. But it was, I liked that mystery of them trying to solve the case. It was like a detective story. It's them trying to find the true story out of it. As we said, like a good journalist. And that is why I am excited to watch more episodes of this because I want to see more of that relationship. I want to see more of them honing their skills and getting juicier stories. That's what I'm looking forward to.
Nice. So the next scene is one we already talked about, where Perry refuses the bodyguard and smashes the table, and all of the debris from the ashtray flies up
Yes.
at him. So from there, Clark is woken from his slumber. Now, side note, apparently that footage of Clark waking up and answering the phone was taken from another episode, The Secret of Superman, when Jim's mother calls Clark because he hasn't come home. That was the episode where there's a doctor who is drugging Daily Planet staffers with truth serum to try to get information on Superman. So it seems like we
Wow.
had a little bit of reused footage here, but on the other line, it's Inspector Henderson saying, "Get Lois, come down to police headquarters. Something's happened."
Yeah. I was like, that's whenever you're giving bad news to somebody, don't say, come down here, I need to talk to you. Because then you're just left with all these thoughts in your head, and that is when your head becomes your own worst enemy. Just hit me up, give me the bad news straight away so I can react accordingly. But it was like, wow, he's just woken up, he's got given this news, and now he's got to get all the way down there to find out what's going on. Oof, tense.
I will say, and I suppose this is probably a function of if they were reusing footage that they only had so much to work with. But this Clark, this season one George Reeves Clark, I don't think would have just said, "Oh, okay, I'll be there." This Clark would have been like, "No, tell me now." Like he's a very impatient is the word that I've kind of come back to a lot with this Clark. He's
Nice.
very
I
much
like that.
like, "Let's go, let's go." And so I feel like, if they were filming the scene wholly from scratch, this Clark would have been like, "No, you'll tell me now."
Yeah, you've woken me up. What's going on? We don't often see Superman in bed, or Clark Kent in bed for that matter. But when we do, he's being woken up. It's like, give the man 5 minutes rest, for goodness sake. When he's not being a journalist, he's off saving the world. Give him his sleep.
I know for sure. So I mean, it is a very grim scene here when we're with Lois and Clark and Henderson,
Yeah.
and they found only Perry White's shoe, and
Wow.
apparently there were eyewitness reports that he jumped off the pier to his death like the others, and they Henderson mentions how the clerk from the newspaper club saw Perry stumbling out after 2 a.m. and he looked, it was like wild and maybe he was
Mm.
drunk, which Clark is very quick to say. Perry White's never been drunk one day in his life.
Yeah.
Not to take us off on too much of a tangent here, but we talked about this a lot in that Secret of Superman episode about this newspaper club, because in that episode, Perry White is staying at the newspaper club, and similarly, it's like 2 in the morning, and he's ordered up a coffee and sandwich, and we talked in that episode about like what exactly is the newspaper club? I mean, it seems to be a hotel slash full on living quarters. I mean, and now with this episode, I am kind of wondering. I think he full on lives there.
I mean, yeah, I mean, we don't get to hear about these side stories about these characters too much, but what's going on at home? Why is he going out to this place to live? Why is he, having to not go home at night? Why is he hanging out in this sort of almost bachelor apartment situation where anything can happen?
Yeah, I know. I remain puzzled by this, but it's quite all right. I'm along for the ride here. But yeah, I mean the stakes have been raised. Now, of course, as we're watching this, we know they're not going to kill off Perry White, but it's still, again, the mystery is deepening about like what exactly is happening here. And I think the main value of a scene like this is to see Lois and Clark's reaction to something like
Wow.
this, right? I mean, they quickly go back into investigative mode and try to figure everything out, but just even for those brief scenes or moments where like they think he might be dead. It's a different angle to explore.
Yeah, and again, it was some fantastic acting in a very short amount of time. Yes, we know these characters respect each other, but they're friends as well as colleagues, and we see Lois truly react to it, and it's a sad moment. But as you said, yes, it doesn't take long before they're right. Let's find out what's happened to him. Let's get the truth because this isn't the truth. We need to find out why this happened.
Well, so speaking of the truth and the why, so the next scene we're in Lois's office, and this is where
I love this.
again, and I don't mean to nitpick, but there are a couple of like critical pieces of information that Clark just kind of throws out there that seemingly they've known this whole time, but it was never said to us, right? The fact that all three of the suicides jumped off the same pier into the harbor, and no
Hmm.
bodies were ever recovered.
Just a
And
shoe.
just the shit. So again, it's fine, but it definitely right. Had we, I mean, I guess I understand why they held that back because as soon as you have that information, I think the picture starts to come into focus here a little bit. But I don't know. I guess it's just one of those things where it was a little frustrating because like seemingly they knew this all along, and we were just in the dark. But that's fine.
But it's when the phone rang and I was like, "This is Lois's office." Yeah, and Clark just clearly for me, I'm taking this phone call, and he even says, "I'll get it. It's probably for me." Why, Clark? Lois is just as good as a reporter as you. Do not assume that phone call is for you. It's for Lois.
I know, man. That really stood out as well. That was so funny and odd because I don't know. It was like he could have easily just said, "I'll get it for you,"
Yeah.
or he didn't need to say anything. He could have just he could have just grabbed it.
It was a very sort of cocky, confident move to take on. I was like, I don't think I could ever do something like that. Or so I was out sort of going around somebody's office or someone's house and their phone started to ring. I was like, oh, I'm assuming this is for me, even though this is your phone. I'm going to take this call because I'm much more important than you are.
I know that's the thing, and it's like they're working on the same story, right? They're
Yeah,
and
exactly.
and even if okay, they're expecting a call from Henderson, but it's like it could be for either. I know that was so funny. I know, very cocky, very arrogant. Like, oh, this must be for me.
And it wasn't anything. They both leave the room, and there's this just a huge shot of the door that says Lois Lane. I was like, are you sure that's your office, Clark? Is you going to take that as well?
I know. Well, so it is Henderson, and Clark's gonna go meet him, and he tells Lois to wait, and then of course Lois doesn't wait, and Lois goes
Of
to the
course.
museum, and Lois really cracks this wide open. Although I did, this part of the episode was cool because Lois and Clark each kind of break the story, break the case in their own way, right? And then it all comes together. But so Lois sneaks in as the museum is closing, right? The Andrew is kicking everybody out, and she hides behind one of the statues, and then after the doors are locked. We see one of the figures and table kind of slide over, and this trap door opens, and Selena comes up. And to your point earlier about Andrew and the dynamic between them, this part of the episode I thought too was particularly fascinating. Where Selena makes a comment about, oh, we have room for more,
Mm.
down there, right? Or either down there or in the gallery. I forget exactly what she was referring to at that exact moment, but room for more, right? More
Yes.
victims. and Andrew's really not having it. And so I thought it was interesting to see that tension between them, that they're not 100% aligned on this.
No, and he's trying to reel her back in, like saying, "I think this is probably enough now. We've done this far too much already." But she's gone by this point. She's like she's got that look in her very very vacant eyes, where she's like, "This is my show. This is it's my name on the invitation, not yours. I am the madam here. This is my gig. You are simply the muscle, and it's only the reason that you're the same size as all our victims that you're around. This is the only reason you're here."
I know. And then orders him to go make coffee. I mean, she's really
Yes, she
go make
doesn't
the
mess
coffee.
about. Go make the coffee. Yeah, she just does. She as if he's not doing enough already.
Yeah, I know for sure. They have quite the operation, but yeah. So you get that insight into their dynamic, and then
Mm.
after they go off to have coffee, apparently Lois, kind of follows the same method and enters this basement here, and
Hmm.
she knocks into the table, and it causes a ruckus, which of course will later attract Selena and Andrew. But she turns on the light, and she finds these four alleged suicides, right? In, as we said before, these exceedingly tiny cells.
I like that part because it's only she got down the stairs, she got under a table, she made a noise, she turned on the light, and then all these inmates who had the ability to speak and raise the alarm didn't say a thing. It was only when they're probably they're probably thirsty and hungry, so they might not have much energy to sort of raise the alarm, as it were. But it's only when sort of Lois spots them that they sort of come alive and say, "Oh yeah, by the way, come and save us, please." Love that.
I know. That was very funny. And also, one thing that I noted here was when she's talking to Perry, Perry's like, get Kent, call the
Yeah.
police now. And I jump ahead to the end of the episode here for a second, because this is something that's come up a bunch of times. This whole notion of Clark being perceived as cowardly.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the episode, in our final little wrap up scene, we're in the office with Perry and Lois and Henderson, and Clark comes in, and we've had the whole Superman save and all that, which we'll get to. But they ask Clark, what happened to you? You
Mm.
disappeared, right, in the wax museum before Superman showed up. And Lois is quick to say, oh, Clark, he always disappears. Okay. Then Perry is like, oh, he was probably hiding behind one of the wax figures.
Mm.
And Clark, ever the great sport, just kind of smiles. He's like, oh, I was hiding behind Superman. And that's our button, and we're out of the episode. But I'm saying to myself, I just feel like there's always this disconnect between how Clark is portrayed and how the characters seem to regard him generally. Right? Like
Yeah.
when Perry, Perry didn't have to mention Clark at all, right? In that scene where Lois finds him. But the first words like, get Kent. So which one is it? Is Clark a coward who's going to hide behind a wax figure? Or is Clark the guy you want when you're discovered in an underground prison? You can't have it both ways.
You can't pick a side. Do you want to be here, like your hero, or the scapegoat, or the butt of all your jokes? Pick one, please. And you can see why Clark Kent and Superman have so many issues with dual identities when nobody wants them to be either person.
Yeah, it's again, I think it's just this contrivance of the show, right? Where they have to sort of account for why people don't put it together. And so every
Mm.
now and then you'll get these little things about like, oh, he runs away, he hides. But again, I think in terms of what we're shown, we're told, oh, he's a coward, but what we're shown is
Oh
is
yeah,
the
he wasn't.
opposite of that.
No, he was taking charge of every scene and also Lois's phone. He's the, he's the man you want by your side. He gets the job done whether he's in the cape or not. I did like this interpretation of Clark Kent because it is very different to everything we've seen before. I think everybody brings their own dynamic when they're portraying Clark Kent. It's not always that bumbling idiot or that person that is deep in thought. Everyone's got their own little niche aspect, but I did like the confidence of George Reeves, and the man can fill a suit. That frame of his shoulders, I was like, okay, I don't know how you can't put these two together, but they're not obviously the persons playing each other. But dude he was packing those big guns.
Yeah. A wonderful, wonderful performance as Clark and Superman.
Yeah, no, it
Such a
was.
joy watching this for sure. So before Lois can do anything though, after she finds the victims, The other two come down. Of course, Lois tries to hide under the table. This was a great bit, though, where they look around, they can't find her. They don't think to look under the table, but then Selena leans on the table and it flips and it whacks Lois in the head. And she's like,
Straight in the
ow.
head. Yeah.
And then, we get a tussle between them. And, Selena puts her in a headlock and they
Yeah,
chloroform
she does.
her.
Yeah, just yells for the chloroform as well. Get the chloroform now. So, yeah, another dark little moment.
Yeah, no doubt. We cut to the pier where Henderson and Clark are poking around. And this is where now Clark is really formulating his theory because he looks under the pier. He sees this little area where, and it was, I don't know what it was like on your TV when you were, but like I could barely make out what Clark
It
was
wasn't.
seeing.
I don't think it was 4K back then, but it was. As a sort of like, oh yeah, that's what he's doing. I had to sort of put two and two together. I had to do my own detective work.
Yes, yeah, but that there's this area underneath the pier where he says someone could, climb up a rope, right?
Yeah.
And starts to articulate this theory that, and I think it's in this scene that it's mentioned that Andrew is impersonating these alleged victims and is wearing a wax mask of their faces, which again, they never even attempt to show us
No.
like what that would look like, but cool idea, very Mission Impossible-esque.
That's it. That's maybe where they got the idea from originally. But no, when we do see these people in the wax museum, they're not even made to look very waxy. I mean, I know they're dealing with black and white cameras back then, but they just. I was looking at them very intensely to see if I can see them breathe or blink. Nothing was done to make them look like a waxwork, but they were, honestly.
Yeah, I know. That's look, a different, as we always say with these episodes, not only was it a different time and they were shooting these very quickly with not a lot of money, but also too, like in terms of how they were going to be viewed on small black and white televisions once.
Oh, yeah.
Like that's the other thing. We talk about this all the time. It's like, well, now we pause, we zoom in, we're studying it.
There's no closed captions. There's no subtitles. I can't go frame by frame. We'll just enjoy the story, and that's what I ended up doing. I was enjoying the story. I was along for the ride by this point. So the small parts of the storyline that we don't necessarily want to be told about, we don't mind because we're enjoying where it's taking us.
That's one thing that I've noticed as I've been doing all of these podcast episodes is that I don't love every single aspect of every episode, but typically whenever I do have an issue with something, it's usually story or character related. Like I've not really any sort of limitation in terms of the budget or production or technology. I get like that usually doesn't bother me. It's like any time where I'm complaining about something, again, it's more story based. I think in terms of what they were able to pull off production wise for the time, for the budget, for the shooting schedule, amazing. Like it's really pretty incredible. So. I just wanted to mention that.
No,
so we have now it's kind of all coming into place. This idea that these people have not been jumping off the pier. Andrew just impersonates them. They're abducted. They stage the suicide. He climbs out and so on. So we are back in the basement now where Lois has been locked up. And this is where like Selena has full on lost it at this point.
Megalomania has kicked off. She doesn't care. She's literally gone off the rails. Andrew doesn't know what to do, but this was you can feel that this tense situation is somehow getting even more tense.
I know part of me, I think one episode with these characters was probably enough, but part of me would have wanted more of their home life.
Yeah,
I
want to see their first date. I want to see when they started arranging the wedding. I want to know what their first dance was. I want to know where their honeymoon was. I can't get enough of these characters because I want their origin story because you've got one that's clearly quite henpecked and will go along with most things. And then you've just got Selena, who is in charge of the whole outfit. I want to see where her motivation came from, to say the least.
Yes. No, I agree totally. It is really funny watching this scene. And again, she's just cackling maniacally and she's drunk on the power, right? Like she really seems to be taken with this idea that, everyone's kind of hanging on her every word about who she's going to predict next. And like you said, I mean, Andrew just looks like, uh-oh, like what am I going to do with her?
Not again. I can't keep up with this.
Well, you know what? In all honesty, it's like, who do you think is responsible for whatever sort of prisoner care is going on here, right? In terms of getting them food, maybe giving them some sort of outdoor time or at least some kind of opportunity to stretch their legs. I feel like maybe they one at a time they'll like let them walk around the basement and then go back in. I mean, I don't know the hygiene aspect, but I feel like all of this falls on Andrew.
He's got a lot on his plate, bless him. He's not only got to, he's got to go and get all these matching costumes of these people that oh, that's clearly Perry White shoes. He's he's gone to the same cobbler. He's gone, but he's doing a lot of the work. Yes, Madame Selena might be a fantastic theatrical host of Waxworks evenings, but again, there's always somebody behind that Wizard of Oz curtain. And in this situation, it is Andrew that's doing all the hard work, and again, doesn't get any credit. Poor old Andrew.
I got to tell you, these are the aspects of the episodes that I probably have the most fun talking about when we sort of speculate about like what's going on between the scenes here. But I think we're spot on with our analysis. I think really Andrew is carrying a very heavy load here in this partnership. So we're now building to our climax here where upstairs Clark and Henderson show up. Henderson's like, I want to take a look around. When Andrew and Henderson walk off, Clark pretends he has to tie his shoe. And then he goes into the other room and he changes into Superman and presumably, again, we're not shown this, but presumably used his X-ray vision because he knows kind of exactly where to go.
Yeah, he knew exactly where the trapdoor was. He didn't bother about pressing the automatic button that made the bust move across the floor. He just whipped open that secret staircase and flew down the stairs. That was quite dramatic. I like that. That was a good move.
You know, especially in this, one of the things that we see over the course of the series is just sort of the sad to say, but like the physical deterioration of George Reeves and I don't think you necessarily see much like this in the later seasons, but in the first season, one of the recent episodes we just did, where he like runs and jumps over this fence, and it's like, wow, like it's great to see this guy move. And here too, it's like he flies down that staircase, like smashes into the wall. It's great. It's funny, and again, we wouldn't have an episode if this happened, so I get why not, but. Especially when Clark was in this museum multiple times previously, right? And he clearly had some sort of sense that something was up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And clearly he already used his X-ray vision to see that it was Perry under that curtain. Maybe you just kind of scan the whole place real quick. Just give it a once over with the X-ray vision.
Yeah, but here's the thing. There's lots of different, going back all those many, many decades ago, there weren't as many guidelines for health and safety. A lot of people were using lead-based paint. So that's probably what it was. He couldn't see through the floor, but he could have heard them. Maybe these prisoners were being gagged at some point. That's something probably that Andrew was in charge of, because it certainly wasn't Selena, but he couldn't hear the prisoners. But in that situation, he did save the day. So it's fine.
Yeah. No, I like that. I'll go with that. So yeah, he finds everyone downstairs. And, we have now our final altercation here. Andrew shoots at him. Of course, the bullets don't hurt. Superman just throws him down and clocks him. I mean, this is
does.
like,
I was like,
yeah,
wow.
This is like classic season 1 Superman. He's just constantly punching the bad guys.
Right. So now you've sold me. Sometimes physical violence, it doesn't, it's not right, but sometimes, it's needed. But yeah, point blank shots to the back with a little pistol as he's bending the bars open, which I love a physical effect. And it was basic, but it was great. As if I was a kid watching that, back in the day, I'm thinking, okay, yeah, this is the Superman that I've read in the comics. This is a Superman that I've heard on the radio show. This is the guy that I've seen in the cartoons, but it's a real human being on my TV in front of my eyes. There's no cheesy cutaway. He's bending those bars open, and then giving Andrew a good clock to the face.
That's the thing, and I know this comes up constantly, but just the physicality and the fisticuffs that season 1 Superman engages in, because it's so divorced from what we are accustomed to seeing. The only people we ever see him punch in the comics and the other, subsequent movies, TV shows, animated series, is other superpowered beings.
Yeah.
And so there is something kind of viscerally thrilling and satisfying about just seeing him clock these guys.
If there's more of this in season 1, then you've sold me. But yeah,
Dude,
it was
not only that. Look, not only does he punch the bad guys, but there are numerous instances we've come across where he needs to render someone unconscious so he can change into Superman and allies, friends. And as Clark, he just knocks their lights out. He just punches them right in the face multiple times.
Sold. Absolutely sold.
Yeah,
That's efficient, though. It's efficiency. That's what it is.
yeah. Now that's the thing. Like in modern years, we've seen kind of the flick if he
The,
needs to do something like that.
I do like the flick. There's a little flick to the front of the head. There's like that's still quite a risky move to do to someone. But if you're going to knock someone out, just clock them. They won't believe it was you, Superman. It's fine.
Yeah, I mean not to rehash, but it's been quite a few episodes now. But one of the episodes, the Mind Machine, Clark's in an airplane with with a character played by Stephen Carr, Dr. John Hurley in this episode. Yeah. He's playing a doctor or a scientist assistant in this episode, and also as a pilot. And so Clark and this guy are in the plane, and Clark has to change into Superman, and so he puts on the autopilot and he just punches the guy in the face.
See, that's the Superman that I need in my life.
It is. That's the thing. It's a different flavor, but you get into it and it's like, oh, okay, I get this. It's different, but man, there's something very, very entertaining and enjoyable about it.
He's getting the job done. That's what he's doing.
So again, Andrew's down for the count. Selena gets the gun. She's going to shoot Lois. Of course, Superman intervenes, throws her over to Henderson. He frees Lois. He discerns that she's all right. She's just been drugged. And then we have our little resolution scene in the Daily Planet offices, which we talked about before, where they're all kind of debriefing, having a champagne toast. They're all very pleased.
Oh, yeah. That was a great work environment. That was fantastic.
It was very Mad Men-esque. I was like, okay, all right. Go along with that. And then, of course, we have that exchange that we talked about where Clark comes in and there's this, sort of speculation about what happened to him. And then our little button there of him saying, I was hiding behind Superman. And then we're out of the episode. And that was Mystery in Wax. It was fun.
And then there was the guy at the newspaper stand that I was very excited to see. An Easter egg in a show as aged as this, because there were Superman comics in the background. So there were some action comics, some Batman comics, and some world's finest comics. Now, as we mentioned before, it's hard to zoom in on quality such as this, but I was trying to find out which comic issues they were. They look like some good issues, but I love when anytime a comic is referenced in a Superman show or a film, it's just very, very meta. And for me to have that in this episode was like, okay, Luke, yeah, you picked a good episode for it to be your first one. Well done.
I'm so glad. I had almost forgotten that. I'm so glad that you mentioned it because, yes, we do get that great bit where, this very meta moment where you see Superman comics on the newsstand behind the vendor. It's a great moment. Yeah, it was a little tough to see exactly what it is. I'm sure there are sites out there that have pinpointed exactly which issues they were, but it was just it was really, really cool to see. I love that.
Nice little transition from all the drama. Then the guy, it's all sorted out, and then back again to the guys drinking their champagne in the office. But no, a fantastic episode. I've seen clips of the show many times over the years. I've seen bullets bouncing off him. I've seen him doing stunts. But for my first episode, as it were, I'm hooked. I want more of this. I want more of that storytelling. I want more of this version of Lois and Clark. I definitely want more of all of them together. Because, it's great to see Superman, but when these two characters, whether it be Perry and Clark or Lois and Clark, it's great to see that chemistry between them, and I want more of that.
100%. Well, in that case, I think you'll really enjoy certainly the rest of season 1, and I wish you well on your journey as you watch more of them.
I will be coming to you with the questions. I'll watch the episodes and I will enjoy your podcast afterwards.
Well, thank you. No, I really appreciate that, and I so appreciate you coming on. The last thing we have to do before we remind everyone to check out your site and podcast and all of that is to rate the episode. So we typically give a rating on a scale of 1 to 5 fedoras. Now, this may be particularly tough in your case since this is the one entire episode that you've seen, but nevertheless, where would this land for you?
As I said, I don't have much to compare it to, but if this was my first time, I was being very, very unbiased and I wasn't a Superman fan, and, I was watching it in this time period of this coming out, it's great escapism. It's great storytelling. It's short and sweet, but to the point. It's got evil characters. It's got suspense. It's got drama. It's got twists. For me, I'm going to give it a 3.5 fedoras out of 5.
Excellent, excellent.
So enough there to want me to keep coming back for more, but I'm sure there are other episodes that give a bit more punch, but this is it would definitely get me coming back for another episode.
Gotcha. I think I'm actually going to go 4 on this one.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to go 4. I really did enjoy it. And especially as it's funny though, I think what happens sometimes is my enjoyment of the discussion sort of colors and enhances my enjoyment or my memory of the episode.
Good. I'm glad.
But no, I think this was, especially as we were talking through everything, like I said, there were really only a couple of actual issues that I had with the episode. Yeah. For the most part, I think it really held up well. And again, I really appreciated just the tension, the mood, the atmosphere. And again, it really was a solid mystery that they constructed that even upon rewatch, I was like, okay, I don't remember exactly where we're going here, and I enjoyed it. So I'm going to go 4 on this one. 4 for me, 3.5 for you. I dig it.
What's been your lowest ranking episode? Which one do you like the least?
You know what's so funny is as host, I really need to be doing a better job of maintaining a list of what my ratings are. The audience might actually be able to answer this better than I can. But the Deserted Village and the Rescue episodes, those 2 I would say were probably my least favorite, and I gave them either a 1 or a 2. Those were pretty low.
Okay.
Those were pretty low.
Okay. And if it was my first time watching this show and you were suggesting an episode for me to watch, which episode would you probably suggest?
Oh, that's a great question. So we very recently covered The Stolen Costume.
Okay.
Where a burglar finds the Superman costume in Clark Kent's closet and hands it over to a pair of gangsters. It's a very, very well-known Adventures of Superman episode, even beyond people who are familiar with the show. That's definitely a standout.
It rings a bell, but it's a great concept. Yes. It's a fantastic concept for a story.
You know, I don't want to spoil the ending, but it's a very kind of controversial ending, and it will prompt some thought and debate. So I would urge you to take a look at that one. Honestly, Superman on Earth, which gives us the origin, it's not necessarily indicative of the season because it's its own story, but it really does a nice job, I think, of telling the story very efficiently over 20 minutes. And I had Zach Moore from Always Hold On to Smallville. He was on for that. And we had a lot of fun. I'll be here forever. You asked for one recommendation, but, and then I would also say The Mind Machine, one of the ones I had mentioned earlier. I think that was a really strong outing and gave us some really fun, kind of thrilling Superman action in the middle of the episode. Oh, and then last one, I promise. The Night of Terror, where Lois is held hostage at a motel when she's trying to take a vacation. That one is very dark, very, very tense, you know, relatively speaking. But yeah, if you kind of like this vibe, I think you might like this. So those are a few that I would say, you know, maybe take a look at. And again, with the way that the shows were shot and aired and everything, there's no serialized storytelling, so you can jump around however you like.
Oh, good man. Good. Well, I'll more than likely start with that origin episode and then just dive in some sort of order. But yeah, as I said before, thank you for taking up more of my free time with more of this show now, because, you know, as if I needed more entertainment to get lost in. I've been, this is going to be a fun journey. I know of it for sure.
Oh, I hope you enjoy. I thank you for taking the time very much. I really enjoyed. This is the first time you and I spoke, and I really had a lot of fun. Where would you like to direct people?
Just look wherever you're on, whatever platform you're on. Just look for the Geek of Steel, and my bearded face will pop up somewhere now and again. I tend to sort of, I don't do TikTok. It's one thing I don't do, mainly because I just don't understand it. But everywhere else, just look for Luke Bugg, the Geek of Steel, and you will find me. I love sharing my passions online, whether it could be Superman, it could be movies, it could be podcasts, it could be me talking about my latest book reading challenge. We mentioned this before we started recording, is that I just love speaking with passionate people and sharing passions online. It's a bridge between two people where you can both talk about what makes you happy. And that's what I'm all about. It's all about that positivity online and doing fun things like this. And even though this may have been the first time that we have spoken, sir, it won't be the last, because I've still got so many more things I want to ask you And I will be honored if he will be a guest on the podcast of Steel very soon.
I would be honored, and I thank you very much. And I hope people will check out that podcast, which will be back by the time this airs. So available on all major podcast platforms and YouTube as well, correct?
Correct.
Excellent.
Correct, share as well. That's it.
All right, terrific. Well, Luke, thank you so much for joining me. Audience, thank you as always. I really appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure.
We will be back in 2 weeks with our next all-new episode. Adventures await. This show is part of the Flat Squirrel Podcast Network, home to Digging for Kryptonite, another exciting episode in the adventures of Superman, Summoning the Zords, and My Comic Shop History, available wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to subscribe and leave a review today. Sign up at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato for additional content. Thank you all.